Welcome to 101.1 FM WBRULP WFOOLP WVVXLP Providence. I'm your co-host, Dhruv Anand.
And I'm your co-host, Alejandro Jackson.
And this is the Outta Pocket Podcast,
where we pull conversation topics out of our pocket.
And occasionally go out of pocket.
So on today's show, we want to talk about all things reading and briefly touch upon different types of learners, which is a little conversation that I just wanted to, go off on. And we have a guest on today's show, Dhruv's sister, Medhini Anand, who we wanted to invite on the show to provide us with a new perspective and change things up.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, Medhini's up from Georgia for this week, so really happy to have her on the show. And without further ado, let's get right into it.
Yeah, so I'm expecting the two of you to mostly carry this conversation because I have not been the most invested in books, to be honest. I feel like I used to read a lot as a kid, and then as I got older, I just only read when it was needed.
Yeah.
For assignments or.
No, I've been feeling that lately. Like ever since, I want to say pretty much the start of high school, but it honestly might even be the end of middle school. I just ran out of time to read books for pleasure. Yeah, what about you, Medhini? What are your general vibes?
For me, I read a lot in, the later half of elementary school. At the beginning half, I was readings for nerds, and I'm not one of those.
Right.
But I am, so. And then I stopped reading, towards the end of middle school, beginning of high school. I wasn't reading as much anymore, and then the pandemic hit, and a new book came out by this author who I'd followed in middle school, and so I picked it up, and I started reading it, and then I went on to, book YouTube and book Instagram and book TikTok or whatever, and then I started reading like a crazy person, and I read 100 books last year. So, yeah, not.
Yeah. So, on the spectrum, Ale and I are closer to the rarely read side, and you're on the always read side.
I'm illiterate at this point.
Yeah, for real, bro.
I remember in, kindergarten, you used to have, a reading log. In elementary,
not the reading log. They give you a pizza party at the end of the year if you read a certain number of books. Except they give you, half a slice of pizza.
And didn't they give everyone in kindergarten a pizza party because consolation prize, and they don't want to discourage us?
Well, bruh. That might have been... I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
No, my school is pretty... I don't want to say cutthroat, but I guess for kindergarten standards, the winners are the winners. But yeah, I remember my reading log. I remember when I first found out of... I don't even know what you call them. They're it's like when you put quotations, but it doesn't signify quotation. It means
the ditto marks.
Yeah, ditto marks. My mom used to always. That's how I found out about them, because we used to pick up a fat book and just read it throughout the week, and so my mom didn't have to rewrite the same thing over. She would just ditto mark everything. I'm old.
Bro, I was a criminal in 8th grade. We had a reading log, and...
You had a reading log in 8th grade?
Well, I don't know if it was a reading log or more of, a reading competition. Strive for 25, right?
That was a competition.
Yeah, that was a competition that we had to do, but...
Did you guys both do it?
Yeah, it was, kind of mandated.
Yeah, our school made us do it.
It was, 25 books throughout the year?
Throughout the
something?
Year, yeah.
Yeah, I became a little nefarious with that. I started bending the rules a little, forging... Maybe I did read a book, maybe I didn't. Who's to say? But my apologies, Dr. Ray. If you're listening to this one, you're a real one.
I put Percy Jackson books on there because I knew if they asked me to talk about it, I could go off on that topic, even though I knew that, I just did not read... That's not the book I read. And then I forgot to keep up with it. And even though I was probably reading more than 25 books, I was just not writing that on that sheet of paper, which I probably lost because I was a mess.
You know what's funny? I knew Percy Jackson was going to come up in the conversation at some point. It's just kind of...
I feel like there were several books that were universal for our generation.
Yeah.
Harry Potter was a big one. Harry Potter was big in the generation above us, too, but, it was also big for us. I don't know how big it is with the kids these days, but I'm sure it still has a decent amount of staying power.
Yeah.
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
Those movies are mid. But yeah, Harry Potter was one of the big ones. Percy Jackson. I felt like our
dystopia boom.
Yeah,
with like
our
Hunger Games and Divergent, The Selection, all of those.
our generation really picked up those YA dystopia books for some reason.
It was so funny because all of those books were like the same characters and the same plot, just like set in a different world, and they would try and market them as like new books, and people would read them, and it took them like 2 years later, and everyone was like, "Oh, every single dystopia book after the Hunger Games was just trash."
Bruh.
So
I still haven't read the Hunger Games.
Neither
I've
have I.
never seen the movies.
they're
Same.
pretty good. They're pretty good. Mockingjay's a hot take. Mockingjay's not as good as the other two, but they're all pretty decent.
I read The Giver. That's the one.
Oh yeah, The Giver kind of hit.
But that one was assigned learning.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. What do y'all think about? Because at some point, I feel like there was a really marked difference between books you had to read for school and books you could read for fun.
For sure.
And I don't know, maybe this is a hot take, but there were very few books that I had to read for school that I didn't like. Like, I think the only one I can remember actively just, like, being beleaguered by is the Scarlet Letter. Like,
I haven't
that.
read it. I haven't personally read it, but I have heard not so positive things. Just that it's the writing style. I've heard about the writing
yeah,
style.
the plot is actually pretty fun. Like, it's like a little drama, you know, a little, like, adultery, a little scandal. But the writing style, bro will talk about a tree. Bro will talk about a forest for, like, 2 pages just to set the scene. I ain't about it, bro.
I usually am not for that type of writing style, but I actually kind of liked it in the Scarlet Letter because the plot was such a dumpster fire that I was just laughing at the characters the whole time. And, like, we made a bunch of Scarlet Letter memes at my lit table, or lang table or whatever, when we were reading that book. And so then it just became really hilarious. So, yeah.
Kind of outnumbered here, bro. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah.
I accept criticism on it. I just said that I had a fun time reading it.
Okay.
It's not one of
I
those
haven't
books
even
that
read it,
I'll
so.
fight for. I won't fight for it, but I will say that I didn't dislike reading it.
Okay. But, like, back to the point. What do you guys think about, like, the books that we have to read for school? Because, at least by American public school standards, I feel like pretty much everyone has, like, a universal set of books that majority of people have read. Fahrenheit 451.
Yep.
1984.
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yep.
Like, you know, just the stuff like that. The literary canon, the dead white man literature, if you presume. But, like...
That was actually my biggest issue with books that we were reading in school, because I don't think until, like, I want to say until I took AP Lang that I had ever really read a book by a female author that wasn't, like, an independent reading project that I did in school. So that was, like, my sophomore year of high school. And so I was reading these...
You took what? You took
AP Lang my sophomore year.
Sophomore year?
Yeah, I took it a year early.
Same here.
Yeah.
Man, they do it different in Georgia.
Yeah, they do. They really
It's
do.
actually only our school that lets people do stuff early because we're crazy people. My friend took it 2 years early. She took it as a freshman.
Oh, yeah, bro. That was
Yeah.
crazy.
But
That's wild.
for me, I was reading a lot of those books and I'd just be like, dang, this is super, like, sexist. And then I'd be reading it and I would, like, just get really upset about how the books we were reading were all such a singular perspective. Like, they didn't really represent other mindsets other than, you know, the white men of this time period. The white men of this time period. Like, you know, it just kind of went on like that. And then I think it was a book called Stealing Buddha's Dinner that I had to read for the summer for AP Lang. And it was like a memoir about this girl who immigrated to the U.S. from Vietnam, I believe. And it was super interesting. And I was reading it and I felt like I really related to her stories, talking about, like, the whole biculturalism and all of that stuff. And it was the first book that I read in school that I kind of felt, wow, this is a book that I actually kind of resonate with and represents a perspective that I can actually relate to. So.
Yeah.
I have a number of things to say, I guess, because there's so many points. I guess one, I feel like, because you were saying about... So, no, I did enjoy some of the books that were, like, assigned. I don't think the issue with such books comes with like content. It's more the fact that they're assigned. Nobody really likes to do anything that is made, like that is essentially forced. So either you do it or you don't, and you suffer through like grades and whatever. And like same thing, like I applying that to I guess a more prevalent, like I want to say context or nowadays is like with COVID and lockdown. The amount of kids who will be like, oh, I want to stay home from school. Let me, like, act sick. I don't want to go to school. Cough, cough, achoo. And then, like, yeah, they get their free day, their free sick day. And it's, like, all fun and games. But once you're forced to stay home, then those same people are like,
buddy, nah.
Oh, I don't want to be in the house. I want to go out.
The exact same people who faked being sick were the ones who were like, you know, this is not really a pandemic. They were the ones who, like, used random P words. Like, you know, on TikTok, they're like, oh, we're in a panorama. Like, it's like those
really?
people. The people who faked sick to stay home from school are the same people who are like, it's just a panorama. Let's go hang out. So.
Dang, bro.
No, yeah. But, like, you know, I mean. And,
that's out of pocket.
You know, obviously.
In my opinion.
I would, you know, I do, like, I'm totally fine with doing what's best for the common good, but, like, I do understand where it's coming from, like, you know, I guess feeling like you don't have any options and, like, feeling like you have to stay inside, and, you know, after a while, like, gets you and you want to go out and you want to, right, obviously, nobody wants to be in lockdown, but, you know, back to, you know, this whole, the books thing is, like, it's one thing to, like, read a book because you chose to, it's another to read it because you were made to, and so I think that's the majority of why so many people are like, oh, we had to read this book in sophomore year and like I hated it. And it's like, well, did you really hate the book or you just hated the fact that you had to? So,
that's actually such a strong effect because for me, like whenever I go on any book platform and I'll look for book recommendations and then someone will be like, oh my god, you have to read this book, it's the greatest book of all time, I immediately go, well, now I'm not reading that because you told me I have to. So
yeah, no, so I think that's the majority of the issue. Then the second thing was talking about like perspectives, I guess, when it comes to literature, or like, so you know, Dhruv, as you were saying about like how the majority of, and you were right in saying that like the majority of books read in like late middle school and high school across the country are pretty much the same. Yep. And you know,
that's a more widespread issue of just like,
I think it comes from like wanting to, I guess, uphold and sort of showcase these like quote unquote American values, of like, you know, like for example, when we were talking about like, you know, like with like the dystopian books of like, oh yeah, you know, like freedom, you know, like speech and whatever, and like my liberties, and it's like it's a very like, I guess, I feel like there needs to be more, I guess, representation of different perspectives in literature. I read a really good book. Oh my god, what was the name? I forgot. Pain. It was for AP Lit, and it was, maybe I'll think about it, and maybe it'll come to me. I'll bring it up again. But it was basically about this young. Well, the book spans like decades, so it starts off as her as like a young teenage girl in Afghanistan, and like you see.
Kite Runner?
No. It's by the same author.
Oh, Thousand Burning Suns or something.
Thousand Splendid Suns.
There you go.
There we go.
But I really enjoyed that book. I finished it in a day, and like, just like, not having the typical like.
Right.
Oh no!
No.
No,
Okay.
no, I just not having the like, I guess, typical, you know, I guess archetypal, you know, sort of. I mean, as you put it, dead white man's literature story. Like it was nice. It was refreshing.
Well, that I feel is a fundamental issue with just like the existence of a literary canon, and the fact that the literary canon as an idea is predominantly, I guess, predominantly based in Western like Western thought and the patriarchy, and both of these influences sort of dictated what books society, quote unquote, deemed important, what values.
Yeah.
And there have been movements to like include more in the canon. I guess books of, classical Asian literature, like The Tale of Genji or like Journey to the West. I'd argue to some degree they're now like included in the canon somewhat, not in the respect that kids in high schools across America are reading The Tale of Genji per se, but in the fact that at least at higher up or more academic institutions, these works are being recognized for their value. So it's kind of tough to say like, should a canon exist, because it gives us a I could argue that in the benefit side, having a canon of common books that a lot of people are familiar with gives us that shared language of ideas and archetypes and really culture. That's kind of the stuff that culture is based on, that we work around with. Whereas unfortunately on the negative side, the existence of a canon itself means that there are things that will be excluded and discounted as quote unquote real literature, whether that be for political or racial reasons, which is already pretty messed up, or even like, some might call it less consequential cases, but I'd argue are still pretty important. Like, would you say that like a young adult novel is real literature or not? Like, a lot of people
Or like Twilight?
well, yeah, like a lot of people will say, Twilight, like obviously I'm not about to say like Twilight belongs to be put up there with like Othello or whatever. But like, uh despite having a really mid writing style, my no
that's
shade.
not a hot take.
No,
That's not a
no
hot
shade,
take.
no
That's
shade,
not a
no
hot take.
shade. But despite that, Twilight was kind of a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like, it was a big deal, and it contributed a lot to our, to the zeitgeist. And I don't think books like, and going beyond Twilight, like, what about, I don't know, like Ready Player One, or Little Fires Everywhere, or like as you start like blending the line between like what's popular and what people want to read, and the sort of quote unquote art literature where people are writing for the purpose of like making a work of art. Where does that line lie? Should the line exist? I don't know. These are all like kind of interesting questions I feel surround books. I think it's kind of unavoidable. Like, you can't say that the canon doesn't exist. It's very clear that there is a set of works that are just kind of ubiquitous.
Yeah, like,
and there's nothing we could do to change the past. But I will argue, like, going forward, there are, we should reconsider how we as a society, like interact with the canon.
No,
like,
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that, as like, I mean, like, I guess I would say that as the history, like, as America grows older, our immigrant population has been growing. That's kind of just how things go. And like, I feel like as time has gone on, you've started seeing more of like immigrant stories and like the perspective of immigrants in America. And so like, I think, like, as you were saying, going forward, like, I think there will be change in what becomes important to teach, because it's good to teach the perspectives of everyone so that you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I guess like everything that you just talked about, it reminds me of another conversation which I guess is related in basically principle, but I mean just in different subjects. It's like we've talked about music and like
Right.
how music is so focused on like Beethoven and all that stuff, and right, and like, you're more educated on this than I am, but I remember, we had this conversation one night, and you talked about, like, basically, like, what sounds good, or like what is culturally accepted, widely culturally accepted to sound good, and like what we like, sort of, like, for example, like music theory, like what the type of music theory that they teach in like institutions, and so this was a whole conversation, which is like kind of related, but just different subjects, I guess.
In that line of thought, there's this one big area of like this whole stigma that exists in the book community, and I feel like it kind of spreads through a lot of creative communities, where a lot of the types of genres and books that are considered less significant, or maybe not as like the canon, or like proper, like they should be taught upon and educated in the award-worthy literature or whatever. A lot of the genres that are kind of beaten down upon in the literature world and in the book community, one thing that a lot of people are noticed are also the ones that are more targeted towards women or young girls. Like, romance is a genre that gets a lot of stuff, and there are some, very not as good books, but there are also really interesting books in these genres, or women's fiction, or YA literature. One of the biggest things that more and more people have been pointing out is that these are media that are either A, largely targeted towards female demographics, or B, largely consumed by female demographics. And it's been one of the biggest issues that I've kind of seen on the internet that a lot of people talk about. A lot of types of media that are more targeted towards female demographics or consumed by female demographics are viewed as less significant and less, like, they have less merit.
I get, yeah, totally.
And it's something that I've seen a lot. And I also think that that's another really messed up point of view that kind of connects back to the canon, where stories that aren't included in the canon are usually the ones that represent people of different races, or people of different, genders, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of this TED Talk that I know so many people have seen, but it's called, like, The Danger of a Single Story. I don't know, they made me watch it in my school. But anyways, she talks a lot about how she spoke about how she was a young girl and living in Nigeria, and she went to, like, a colonial school because it was right post-colonial era, and a lot of the books that they were given there, they didn't really show any people who were actual, Africans. And so when she would write her own stories and draw her own pictures, she would draw herself with blonde hair and blue eyes, which is really messed up to think about, because, they get this one story so ingrained in their brains that all these characters look the same way, and all of that you have to look the certain way and act a certain way to be, I don't know, like the main character, I guess. And it also, kind of connects to the danger of a single story, is that if they keep perpetuating these stories that only represent either one perspective or one type of character, or they view stories that represent other things and other peoples and stuff as holding less merit, then it kind of perpetuates this idea that, one group is more significant than the rest.
Yeah.
That was kind of, I don't know, I thought it was interesting.
No, I totally hear what you're saying. I think that one of the things, like, I've been thinking about throughout this conversation is, like, how even when we do, or I guess in the literary canon that has existed up until now, as we've spoken about, a lot of, like, whenever you see, like, minorities, it's always from the perspective of, like, the white majority.
Yup.
And, like, I mean, I feel like I am of the opinion, and throughout, like, the literature that I've read with, like, for example, African Americans, there's always, like, this sort of stereotype that I've seen throughout these books. It's like that they speak very Southern and all this stuff, and it's like,
bro, Uncle Tom's Cabin. What we learn about in history classes as being one of the big movements in American culture that sort of exposed to the world, like, how horrible slavery is, and what, got people up, like, we should do something. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author, was a white woman. Like, but at the same time, this gets, like, these discussions are obviously so nuanced because, you know, obviously in retrospect, it's so easy to be like, why was a white lady, like, talking about African American experiences, like, but at the same
Because of
time,
circumstance, like, because at the
yeah,
time, like,
exactly,
they, yeah, because they weren't. I mean, I feel like, okay, the best way I can put it is, I think when certain groups are in a position to not have their voices heard because they simply cannot express them,
mm-hmm.
I think it is okay for people to rise up and, I guess, I don't want to say, like,
Advocate.
yeah, sort of advocate. Once you are put in a position, or once the oppressed are put in a position to where they can sort of pass the torch. That's that's how I see it.
You know, that brings up a really big point. This is like a little more, you know, off the topic more out of pocket than what we're talking about books. I always think this whenever I see like any form of like activism on social media. Like I have mad thoughts. I feel like I've referenced this in so many of our episodes before.
The social justice warrior.
Yeah, but like it's like it's so hard because you don't want to like gatekeep something as important as like activism.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, sometimes I feel like the pastel infographics that I see on Instagram are like overpowering the voices of people that should be heard. You know, and like obviously like distilling the information into like they distill issues into an almost like black and white way where the issue is no longer presented as nuanced. And obviously that comes down to like anytime a piece of work is made or an infographic is created or whatever, there is bias behind it, and it could be explicit bias or it could just be implicit, like the author just has certain worldviews that they haven't checked yet. But like beyond that, it's also I don't know, I feel like they get amplified, and at the end of the day a lot of them don't add value to the conversation that's being had. Like, and I've been feeling that especially with, and this is gonna set this episode within a very specific time frame, but the Will Smith Chris Rock slap, like that whole conversation blew up, and I feel like there were so many different voices bickering, but the conversation itself didn't seem to be going anywhere. And here we are 1 week later, the ruckus has sort of died down, and I feel like nothing happened, you know?
Not really, no.
No. Anyway, books though. So like
No, actually, let me ask you, I guess, because to be blunt, it wasn't, I guess, entirely clear to me the point, because I said about passing the torch, and you started talking about like Instagram activism, so like what's
I feel like I guess the point with that is there are situations where historically, you know, the slave population in America was not allowed to learn how to read or write. They were like, in the sense of the word, illiterate. And certain people like Frederick Douglass learned how to get around that. Like, homie was a real one.
King.
Like, actually, bro.
I envy that beard.
Because all you got is the goatee.
Hey, one day.
Anyway, but you know that was a population that couldn't make an impact on what we think of as literature. Modern, like during that time frame, it was just not really possible for a slave to write a book about their experiences.
You can't write about your perspective if you don't know how to write.
Yeah, exactly.
And like that's the whole point of why they didn't teach them. So.
And that's kind of why those voices aren't represented from that time period.
Yeah.
But now I feel like with not only the democratization of like social media giving everyone a platform to make their voices heard, but also just like at a fundamental level, pretty much everyone in America, with very few exceptions, knows how to read and write. And yeah, like because of that, it is so much easier for different groups of people to make their voices heard. And but on the flip side of that, because everyone can make their voices heard, there are some people who don't know when to hand off the torch, as you were saying, to the people that really need to, have their opinion shared.
So many people post so many things on their social media constantly about different issues, and I feel like there's something new every hour or every day. And then whenever I go on social media, I feel so overwhelmed by things because I don't ever have the opportunity to go, okay, I see this issue. I'm going to take the time to learn about this issue and educate myself on it, because by the time I look away and come back, there's already like 3 more things that have happened. And it's just like, it's just so many voices bouncing off of each other, and you can't really...
The one that gets me is when you scroll and it's like a whole like thread about like Ukraine or BLM or whatever, and then you tap once more and the person's story is like a beach pic from Miami, and you're like, huh? Like it's literal whiplash. I'm like seeing like these important issues and I'm like, dang, okay, like this is what's happening in the world. Boom, like prom pics, huh? Like, I don't know. It's
Yeah. So, I totally get what both of you guys are saying. With social media, everything moves at such a rapid pace. And yeah, I have. It's funny. I actually had this conversation with a friend over spring break this past week about being educated on issues and et cetera, et cetera. And I was blunt. I was like, I am not the most educated on like issues, mostly because like. There's a number of things. One, I'm going to keep it 100. I personally stopped watching the news after Trump was elected. I didn't watch the news for 4 years because...
it became a lot.
It
was a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah. And so I kind of stopped watching the news for a bit. And also, just time. Like, it takes time to sit down and really, like, invest yourself. Cause, like, it's one thing to, like... And I feel like... And I kind of feel like that kind of ties into... why people post so much on social media, because it's quick, it's easy. Like we've mentioned before in episode 5, like our social media episode.
Bro, you really remember the episode numbers.
I do remember that one for some reason, but as we mentioned, like Instagram's like something you open up when you're waiting in line for something, or when you're waiting for the elevator, you open Instagram, you scroll through it really quick, and you see all these things, and so like
taking a doogie.
Yeah. And so it's it's quick, and so I feel like one of the reasons why so many issues are like posted on social media is because it gets quick, and it doesn't require the time where you like really sit down when you can just quickly scroll through the thread. So anyways, I was having this conversation with a friend, and I was talking to her about how I was like, I feel like I personally need to educate myself more on things just to be a better citizen of the world. Not just so that I can have a debate with somebody, but just to understand people. And so I had no idea this was a thing, but Google has like a news thing. And so it's pretty much they take like news stories from all the sources and they just kind of throw it on this one site. So I personally have found it to be helpful for like me educating myself on things, and so like I spent today like 30-40 minutes just like scrolling through it while I was watching a lecture. But yeah, so and then the other thing I want to talk about was, I guess, and then also with social media, we'll get back to reading eventually. Maybe. Hopefully.
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll see. But the other thing with social media that we were talking about with perspectives and giving everybody a voice is like, although we have this idea that social media gives everybody the ability to speak out, a lot of the algorithms that go behind these platforms came from somebody coded them.
Yep.
And as you were saying, with implicit biases, everybody has them.
Yep.
Everybody has them. And so these people who code these algorithms, which, is, I feel like it's not too much of a stretch to say, are predominantly, white men, or, like these people these privileged individuals who, got an education, went to, like, went to university, got trained in CS or marketing or business or whatever, and are now running these companies, and you know, like I said, everybody has these implicit biases, and they make their way into these algorithms, and so although these platforms are supposed to, you know, give everybody the opportunity to voice their opinions and their concerns, etc., I feel like these algorithms do still in a way drown them out. You know, it maybe, you know, obviously I do think we've come a long way from people's opinions getting voiced, but I think there still is a bit of a filter.
Yep.
If the best way I can put it is, you know, if it was a really fine filter before, where like barely anything could get through, I guess the sort of pores in the filter have sort of opened up a little. Well, I mean, I don't want to say a little, because I mean, in the last 400 years they've opened up a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, point being that, yeah, I feel like even with social media, there are implicit biases, and the algorithms that run it, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And I mean, from that, it's like, you know, there's the infamous echo chamber of social media, where what you scroll determines what you get, and then just feedback loops, and then you could just get boxed into only seeing stuff from one end of the political spectrum, and then other people will get stuff from the other end, and it leads to just people living in the same world, having two completely different ideas of what the world around them actually is. Yeah, I don't know, kind of why, but like books though. So like, quick swerve, quick conversational gymnastics.
So I guess you think, or well, because you were talking earlier about sort of the book community and how there's a tendency to sort of discount books, like, you know, like young adult books. So I guess, because this is actually something, I guess, and we can all give our take on this. Like, what do you think we should do as a society to like better incorporate, you know, different sort of materials and whatnot? So, because I guess I could go first to give an idea of what I was thinking. So like, one of the things that I obviously talked about earlier was like being forced to read stuff and whatever. I feel like, and there are drawbacks to this, and the sense, like, ultimately this would come down to individual responsibility, but like the idea of like, instead of assigning one book, have a series of books that you can pick from a list in like a certain topic, right? So like, obviously I do not like books like To Kill a Mockingbird. I think are, you know, I think they're important because obviously they teach about racism in America, and you know, books are meant to teach history essentially, and like, or you know, sort of different themes and rules of life, so that we either don't make the same mistakes again, or we just, you know, are able to internalize them and just be better people. And so I think like books like To Kill,
or at least the books that you read in school.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, some are for fun, right? But even I think like books about, like, you know, adventures and stuff, they still, I feel like, have overarching themes that are that apply to, like, you know, like themes of love and family, and I feel like those are kind of just universal. Like, but I guess, yeah, more like, you know, nuanced points, like, you know, like racism and etc. Like, I think I think being able to like pick from a list of like different, like of different books from a variety of different authors, and like have each student like read whatever book they want to read. And I guess the drawback I was saying earlier was, well, in terms of like personal responsibilities, like a kid might pick a book and he might not actually read it, because like it's like, because like if a class picks a book like as a class and you like read it through class, then like I feel like it's easier to enforce that somebody actually reads it, because like, you know, reading it in a group kind of puts you in that spot. But like, you know,
one of the things that I remember doing in school is that they would do that, and then it would be one book a year, I think, where they would give a list of books and everyone picked one, and it was like a book club project. So it would be like, okay, these 5 people, you guys are reading Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and you guys are reading Speak. And these were all YA books that they picked for this book club. I think this is like my sophomore year. And then in my junior year, the books that they were doing were like books that we had read before in school, to see how our opinions on them have changed. And that's what we did in AP Lit. And I thought that that was really interesting, because what we did was we would read through the synopsis of all the books. We'd rank which one we'd want to do by like favoritism. And then our teacher would be like, okay, yeah, you guys can do this book. Oh, there are too many people in this book. group, are you okay with doing your second choice or whatever? And then you would all have to do a project together but get individual grades, I guess. And I think that was really interesting in a way of introducing more voices into what we were reading in school. Like the YA one, it was the first time that they had let books that our teachers were teaching about had like queer stories and modern queer stories at that. I feel like that's not really seen, especially in the literary canon. So I thought that was really interesting. Another thing that my AP Lit teacher used to do is she used to do 10 minutes of reading time where you could pick whatever book you wanted to read and you could just read it during that time period before class each day. And she would share what books she was reading and which books she was going to read next. So if you wanted to read along with her or, again, open your eyes to a bigger community of books, you could. And I thought that that was something that was really interesting, and I thought that that definitely helped with opening up the worldview and introducing some different perspectives and stuff like that.
Yeah. You have any thoughts of how we should better
Yeah, I mean,
diversify literature?
It's such a complicated question because, I mean, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Should the canon exist at all? By the existence of a canon, by having that structure, we create a shared vocabulary and a shared, like, currency of ideas.
I think it's important because, like, as a kid, like, if we left it up to the individual to sort of find books and stuff,
you're not going to know where to start. Yep.
Yeah.
So, like, I think it is important. However, I think it needs to be diversified. It's like,
I agree.
And I think there are movements to diversify it, at least recently.
Yeah.
Another thing I feel that should be taught more in schools are, like, books that came out in the past 5 or 10 years that have been viewed as really critically acclaimed that represents more of the modern social movements, I guess. Like, one author whose books I love, who's, like, won tons of awards and is super critically acclaimed right now, she's, like, such a hot topic, is Sally Rooney. She's the author of books like Normal People, which is a huge Hulu show now, and stuff like that. And I thought her books were really interesting in telling human stories. And again, they were one perspective. Like, she was a white Irish woman, right? And so she was writing these stories set in Ireland because that's where she's from. But I thought her books were really interesting when representing mental health and modern conversations on mental health, in my opinion. And it was also very strong, like, female stories. Like, it was the first time that I read about, like, menstruation in a book. Like, that's such a taboo topic for no reason, considering, like, it happens to, like, almost 50% of the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I feel like, yes, sure, like, it is important to, inform ourselves about previous modes of thought. So, it's just, it shows us where we come from. So, like, obviously, reading stuff written by, like, Thoreau will inform us about transcendentalism, and that's, like, important. But reading modern books are just so much more engaging, I think, to the average student.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to find the motivation. Like, why should I care about, like, Ishmael and Moby Dick? Like, this dude's hunting a whale. Like, Captain Ahab's out here. Like, what does it matter? But when you see yourself in a book, like, when you read books like Stealing Buddha's Dinner or Everything I Never Told You, and you're like, this character, not just, like, it's not just having similar, like, conflicts of, like, oh, like, me versus society, me not being able to make friends. Like, that's, yeah, sure, those are, like, pretty universal, like, issues, but when you see, like, person with the same identities facing, like, remarkably similar, like, experiences, that compels people to read books. Modern books, big thumbs up, especially because it gets us more engaged with what's happening now and adds to that vocabulary that I was talking about.
Yeah, so I want to make a transition because I still want to talk about this. So I guess I'll sort of weave my way into this next topic, throughout what we've been talking about. But so I guess going off what you're saying about how modern books are good, another thing I think is good are audiobooks and how they give more people access to literature, because it's now you can just like, instead of like having to buy a copy of a book, I don't know, you get into this whole thing about cutting trees and whatever, right? You can just like listen to them on the go. You can listen to them in the car or whatever, doing work like this podcast. And so, but I guess the larger conversation I wanted to have was types of learners, which is something I had referenced at the beginning of the conversation. And one of the reasons why I brought this up is because although I am a fan of having paper books, because it's just kind of nice. I do a lot better with audiobooks because of the type of like learner I am. And so I wanted to I have like 2 articles here. Well, one of them is an article by Rasmussen University College, rasmussen.edu. And the other one's a straight up research paper, which I'll just briefly go through. But about like the 4 different types of learning styles. And I think...
And we can link these in our website, right?
Yeah, which I have to, I will do. But yeah, so I just wanted to talk about, so really quickly, I'll just run through I'll run through the 2, this article and this paper, and just talk about sort of the 4 like learning styles that I would say there. So the first one is visual learners. Essentially, these are people that learn through seeing, through pictures, diagrams, so this is, as this article says, which is it's titled 4 Types of Learning Styles, How to Accommodate a Diverse Group of Students by Rasmussen University. If you all would like to check it out on your own time. But essentially, it talks about, pictures, diagrams being good for visual learners. And so, like, it says, like, how to cater to them. Like, the whiteboard or the smart board is their best friend, to, like, have them be able to see what they're being taught. Second is auditory learners, which is what I am. So that's why audiobooks for me personally are better for me than paper books. And it's been funny because it's always been something that people like are like, oh, you're so lucky. Because when I go to class, I simply have to listen. Funny. So a friend actually texted me like a few weeks ago, and she was like, oh, do you take notes in bio? And I was like, no, because she never sees me take notes. And I was like, yeah, it's because I'm an auditory learner, and when I write, it distracts me. Like, I cannot listen
right,
and think about what I'm writing at the same time. And so it actually negatively impacts me to take notes in class than if I were to just sit there and listen. And so essentially I'm an auditory learner, and so all I have to do is like listen to like a professor, and I better I guess care, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess take in information that way. And so, essentially these students would rather listen to a lecture than read written notes. They often use their own voices to reinforce new concepts, and that's actually something that helps me when I read like something. I like sometimes read it out loud if I need to remember it. It just like helps me. Then there are kinesthetic learners, which are these people who learn by doing things hands-on. I feel like a lot of these people are probably engineers, because that's mostly what engineers do.
I don't know about that one, Chief, because I'm not an engineer, but I feel like for me it's always helped. Like, I think everyone, it's not like either or. Like, everyone has like a mix of these that they use, and for me, I've found like I have to listen in a lecture, but I take notes, because when I take notes, I'm like cognitively processing what I'm hearing, and I'm distilling it to what I think is the most important piece of information that I just received, or what I think is like what's going to show up on the test from what I just heard. Because like you got to filter out, like when professors are talking, there's going to be stuff that is just like random. So like when I write down notes, I feel like I'm filtering out the randomness and really getting what I need to know on a piece of paper, and then I could go back and get it again in my head. And when I'm learning like more like sciencey things, I find diagrams always help me, because orienting things in space, I feel like I need to be like very hands-on, or when I like visualize things,
Yeah. So I mean, well, I don't. So let me just read the fourth one, and then I guess we can all, because I wanna talk about that a little bit more. But then the fourth one, which I guess the article by Rasmussen talks about it as reading/writing learners. The other like research paper that I found calls it intellectual learners or intellect learners. It says reading/writing learners prefer to learn through written words. While there's some overlap with visual learning, these types of learners are drawn to expression through writing, reading articles or books, writing in diaries, looking at words in the dictionary, and searching the internet for just about everything. And so I guess I will quickly switch over the other, like the research paper. Essentially, the first three are the same. Like, visual learners, it's everything I talked about. It's learning by listening, or learning through the eyes and by watching. Auditive learning or auditory learning, which is by listening and speaking. Haptic learning by touching and feeling, and then learning type 4, which this research paper says, I guess, designates it as learning through intellect, and it's more like the type of people that like do best. Like, so like for example, I won't lie, like when I'm learning something, I kind of need it to be broken down into like more simple terms, just because it's like easier to digest. These learners, according to this research paper, essentially can just look at like the equation, like units and all that complicated terminology, and like they actually understand it best that way. And so I don't know, personally, I mean, I know, and actually there's another interesting thing I want to touch about, which, I don't know, obviously don't know how, I guess, true or not this is, but one of the things that this research paper talks about is that like it basically makes a claim that visual and auditory learners, their learning is only really good for memorizing. Haptic is kind of useless, or so this article kind of claims, which, and then it says that like the best for like actually understanding the like going ons or like of things behind, like, I guess like the like why things are the way they are like intellect learners, and like that you can like look at an equation and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense because this part of the equation, it comes from this and that, and like I guess they simply just derive stuff in their head or something. So so would you guys,
I feel like that's kind of elitist to say that that's the best kind of learning.
That's why
because
that's why I said that, obviously I don't know, I guess,
because
like,
any average person like straight up deriving things in their heads is probably something that's not gonna occur.
And I mean, I guess, like, obviously, like,
yeah,
I mean, this research paper might even have implicit biases that right, so
yeah,
it's just, it's a whole conversation. But I guess one question I wanted to ask, because obviously we had a very charged conversation this episode, which I mean, it's fine, it's good to have these conversations, but I guess what kinds of learners do you guys think you are?
I feel like I'm definitely more of a visual learner. Like, for me, if I'm just listening to something, I can't focus on it. I need to be able to see what is happening so that my brain has something to focus, and I also can't just be, like, sitting still and just, like, watching and listening. That's why I always take notes, because otherwise, if I'm not doing something with my hands while I'm watching it, then I tend to space out.
Yeah.
It's just something that I've always done. I'm a very spacey person. And so for me, I need to be looking at something to be able to, like, comprehend it properly. That's why I never knock on audiobooks, because I know that they're definitely helpful when it comes to, disability needs. And I also know that it's definitely different for every reader based on what they need. But for me, like, looking at the words on the page always helps me visualize what I'm reading better.
For sure.
And so that definitely helps. And, looking at diagrams, seeing where things are. Like, if I don't have a way to orient myself, I guess, I'm just completely lost. Like, if I cannot see it with my eyes, I'm just like, what is this? Like, whenever I do physics problem and they're like, a ladder is leaning on a tree with a 30-degree angle, I'm like, what is this? And I have to draw it out. I have to know, what does it look like? So I think I'm definitely more of a visual learner with some hands-on stuff. Like, I definitely feel for a lot, like, I took healthcare in high school, and for a lot of the clinical skills, I needed to be able to do it rather than just see how it's done and listen about it, because, with skills like, oh, you need to give an injection at this angle, and these are the tubes and how you attach them for a phlebotomy lab and all that stuff. If I wasn't actually seeing how to do that or how to place the EKG leads and then repeating it myself, then I was kind of like, okay, this is the fourth intercostal space, but also what is the fourth intercostal space? So
how about you?
I don't know. I talked about it a little earlier. I feel like I just like taking in information in all forms. I probably
you cracked though.
I don't know. It's just like it's not that like I'm every type of learner. But actually this raises an interesting point. So I watched there's I'm sure you've heard of the YouTube channel Veritasium. Yeah. Very big channel. I've always enjoyed its content. But there is a YouTube video that Veritasium made about how learning styles are a really persistent myth.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the specifics of what he was talking about. We can link the video in the website for people who are more like who are interested in watching it. Yeah. But like from what I remember, it's kind of like useless to say like I am a visual learner, and like for me at least, like if I get myself into the mindset that like I can only learn visually, I feel like I'm depriving myself of other ways to understand, because also different concepts I feel require different like amounts of learning. Like if I'm learning how to change a tire,
mm-hmm.
I can't just like listen to someone tell me how to change a tire. I need to get out there and do it. But if I'm trying to learn about photosystem 2 and the thylakoid membrane, I need to see a diagram of like photons and whatever like working in like biology. Like I don't know. So
I guess okay, so I guess I wouldn't I agree that different things require different types of learning, and I don't think that I don't think that people should box themselves in and like I can only learn in this type of way. However, and obviously, I'm biased by this.
Everyone's built different.
Yeah, and I'm a little biased by this, because like I said, I feel like I'm an auditory learner, and like at least as far as I know, it hasn't worked like basically like I guess through quote unquote experiment, even though I don't know how official like I don't know official my day-to-day experiments can get, but like I do like learn best through auditory learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that it's good to limit yourself, but I do think it is helpful to
know what works for you,
understand which one works best for you, because I do basically the point that I disagree with was that learning types aren't a thing. I feel like they are.
It just depends on how much or how strong it is.
Yeah, it depends on the activity and like what's required. But I do think that some people take in information best in different ways. And I guess that ties into our uniqueness of perspective episode. And so
shout out episode 4.
Yeah, shout out episode 4. But I think that for example, like with me, I learn best through hearing things, and so. Although I don't think it's good to limit yourself to, I guess, one type of learning, I think that figuring out what learning type is, I guess, yours, or like what works best for you, which one you learn easiest through, it'll help you when it comes to like studying, because then like you will understand like, how best to take in the information that you are receiving. So. That's essentially what I wanted to touch upon. That's our piece of advice for you guys. This episode is to we encourage you to figure out your learning style.
Yeah, so everyone has a different way of studying, and I feel like once you find something that works for you, just stick with it.
Yeah.
That being said, I think we're coming up on our time, but I do want to do something really fast just to tie it out, because we were talking about books, but I never asked. Rapid fire. What's your favorite book?
I'm not gonna lie, 1,000 Splendid Suns. After I read that, like, it's my favorite book.
For me, it changes a lot, but currently I'd have to say it's been Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo.
Yeah, same here. So many different books I like, but if there's one that I had to choose, I really enjoyed reading The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green.
You never did lend me that one.
Bruh. Ooh, bro, I thought you hit a lick on it from my bookshelf for the summer. I don't even know. Anyway, that's our time.
Yep.
As always, it's a real pleasure talking to you, and I'm really glad to see my sister.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, let's take it out. You've been listening to 101.1 FM, WBRULP, WFOOLP, WVVXLP Providence.
You guys can check us out on the Outta Pocket Podcast website. That's www.theoutapocketpodcast.com. And Outta is spelled Outta.
Yep, on the website. You could also check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And also, you can shoot us an email through our contact page. Let us know what you like. Topics you'd like to see in the future. Maybe, like, if you want to get on the show, hit us up.
Yeah, and our Instagram page is also on the website now, so go check out the Instagram.
So true, bro. Thank you so much for tuning into the Outta Pocket Podcast. We'll see you next week. And remember, why are you watching your lectures on 2 times speed when you can clone yourself and get double the productivity?
Yeah, catch you guys later, and take care.